Welcome to the Spiritual Leadership Podcast with Charles Kyker. I'm your host, and thank you for being with us today. I'm excited, real excited about this podcast because it's a collective, really. In other words, we're going to begin with one theme, and then we're going to move into the next theme at our next podcast. And so we've got kind of a threefold podcast in store for you today. And today's theme is growing you so you can grow your company, your nonprofit, or your local church. And so our focus is growing you, and we're looking at the three hurdles to growth. Three hurdles to growth. I've been reading the Mastering the Rockefeller Habits by author and consultant Verne Harnish. Verne Harnish. It's really a great book. I ordered it thinking that it might be a book on investing and looking at your legacy. In other words, building trust, building a will, what are you going to leave behind, and all of those things. But was so delighted to realize it's actually a leadership book. He's a consultant to Fortune 500 companies, and he talks about Rockefeller principles. As you know, John D. Rockefeller was an entrepreneur. He's often only known as the first billionaire and this type of thing. But at one time, he actually took care of about 95 or 96% of processing the oil in the United States. That's what his company did. And the other thing that's interesting about him that I've learned over the years, just actually by vacationing and being on study leave, is that he had other very successful partners. He surrounded himself with outstanding leaders. One of them was Henry Flagler. And Henry Flagler was an entrepreneur. Henry Flagler wanted to connect Florida, starting in Jacksonville and connecting it all the way to Key West, Florida. So Henry Flagler built a railroad that would take you all the way to Key West. And St. Augustine, of course, there's Henry Flagler. He helped to found a college there in West Palm Beach. He built the breakers. He also, of course, had his own private estate there. And there's a Henry Flagler Museum. But he was worth around $700 million when he died. And, of course, John D. Rockefeller was the first billionaire. But today, we're looking at three foci which I believe every leader in every organization needs to master. Number one is leadership growth to select the right people to do the right things. So we're going to be talking extensively today about leadership growth to select the right people to do the right things. The next important focus of any growing organization is to develop healthy systems for growth. To develop healthy systems for growth. I've heard other leaders say, I've never been to your organization, I've never been to your nonprofit, your for-profit, I've never been to your local church. But what I can tell you is your local church, your organization is currently structured for the results that you're getting. If you want to get different results, you're going to have to change your systems. You're going to have to change your systems. So we're going to talk next time in our next podcast about developing healthy systems. And then the third, together in this trilogy, is recognize and navigate market trends for growth. Recognize and navigate market trends for growth. One of the most important things that we have to do is we have to realize things are changing. The trends are shifting, and the culture is looking at something different. Does anybody remember Kodak? Does anybody remember when you used to develop your pictures? You would take your pictures for development. That's not too long ago. Does anybody remember VHS tapes? We have a 12 and a 14-year-old that live in our house. They just dug those out the other day, and they said, "Where's the player?" I said, "I have no idea, but there's probably one or two in storage around here someplace." When we were newly married, we had a VHS recorder. We recorded our children. when they were small, and but it's not what we use anymore. Most people use their smartphone to take family videos, record things. The question is, how and where are we storing them, for future use? But we've got to recognize market trends for growth. Today, as I mentioned, we're focusing on the leadership growth to select the right people to do the right things. Our text today, I'm actually looking at a couple, but what I'm focusing on is Luke chapter 6. Matthew speaks of it. Mark speaks of how Jesus chooses the disciples because he obviously chose the right people to do the right things. And when you first look at them, you think this is a ragtag group of people. How in the world is Jesus going to establish a church that would last over 2,000 years with this group? But Jesus knew what he was doing. So let's look at Luke 6. Let me read it to you. If you're driving or traveling, it's verses 12 through 16. It says, one day soon afterward, Jesus went up to the mountain to pray. It's the first thing he did. And he prayed to God all night. He took leadership selection very seriously. At daybreak, he called together all of his disciples. Now, it's mentioned in various places that he had as many as 70. That's an echo to our one-year Bible reading for today in the book of Exodus, where Moses had 70 elders. But Jesus had as many as 70 plus disciples, and could have had, even more, of course, because we know in John 6, there was a great sifting. Jesus was teaching, and he said, if you want to follow me, if you want to be my disciple, then are you willing to eat my flesh and drink my blood? And I think folks were like, what in the world is he talking about? And are you willing to die? And all of a sudden, there were like a lot of folks that just kind of went away. And in John chapter 6, Jesus has this famous saying where he looks at Simon Peter and he says, will you also go away? And Simon Peter responds, no, Lord, for only you have the words of eternal life. But Jesus is constantly choosing leaders. He's constantly engaged in a sifting process. Years ago, I had a layperson say to me, Jesus would have never cut anybody from the choir. I said, he would if they couldn't sing. He would if they hurt people's ears. He would if they couldn't match pitch. He would if they actually could benefit the kingdom by moving to another ministry and flourishing in it and help to touch hearts and change lives by using their talents and gifts in another area. Jesus did, in fact, make cuts. He made one right here. So let's continue. So at daybreak, he called all the disciples, and he chose how many? 12 to be the apostles. Here are the names: Simon, whom he named later Peter; Andrew, Peter's brother; James, John, Philip; Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas; James, the son of Alphaeus; Simon, who was called the zealot; Judas, the son of James; and Judas Iscariot, who later betrayed him. So there's two vital lessons here. Jesus did pray all night, so he was very selective and wanted to make sure he had the right people. Jesus prayed all night. He was very selective and wanted to make sure he had the right people. In church world and in nonprofits, sometimes we think that we're not being Christian if we exclude people. Well, I think we should be careful about excluding people, but we're being very Christ-like if we select the right leaders for the right task who have the right set of gifts and the right set of talents to lead an impactful ministry. We are not being good stewards of the kingdom of God if we need somebody who's an 8 or a 9 out of a scale of 1 to 10 in a leadership and we choose a 2. We are not being good stewards of God's kingdom. So let me just clear the air on that. You have got to select the best leaders for the ministry to impact it. Now, what we are engaged in is care and love of people if we're in a nonprofit or a local church. And I think if you're a Christian business leader, you still want to take care of your people. So you want to make sure you've got the right people in the right seats on the right bus going in the right direction. So before we ask somebody to leave the bus, we need to see, is there another seat that person can sit in? Does she or he have talents and gifts that we hadn't thought about that they could actually be used in this organization or this company? Number two, as I said, two important lessons that Jesus gives. Jesus chose his A team by looking who hung out with A team members. He chose his A team from among those other disciples. Like I said, there were 70 recorded at some places and maybe even hundreds more. So he noticed who his A team was by looking who hung out with the A team members. In other words, was Simon influencing people? Did people hang around Simon? Simon owned his own business. He was a fisherman. He was used to commanding people to go out on his boat and help him to fish. So maybe it was Simon was kind of a natural-born leader. We know that that's the person Jesus chose to hand the keys to his church. And he said, I'm going to hand these keys to you. Whatever you bind on earth, I'll bound in heaven. Whatever you set loose on earth will be set loose in heaven. So I believe Jesus saw in Simon incredible leadership capacity. Maybe not yet realized, but I think he saw that. So he chose an A team from looking at the A team members and how they interacted with other people. John Maxwell is famous for sharing this formula in developing the leaders around you, and he has that scale from 1 to 10. And he says if you choose a 7 or an 8 or a 9, that person will attract people at least who are 5, 6, or 7. But on a scale of 1 to 10, if you choose a 3, then they'll only attract people who are 1 or 2 in the scale of leadership. And so you limit your capacity by choosing leaders who have lower leadership capacity. If you want to up the ante in your leadership capacity in your organization, choose people that are A-team people. Choose people who have leadership capacity. If you choose a 3, they're only going to attract 1s and 2s. But if you choose a 7 or an 8, they'll at least attract 5, 6, or possibly 7s. A few times in my ministry, I think I'm about a 7 or an 8 in leadership. There are a few times in my leadership I have been able to attract a 9 or a 10. But it wasn't because of necessarily my leadership acumen. It was because I was extremely passionate about casting a 10 vision, casting a 10-plus vision for where we were going, and that God really wanted us to do great things. And because I was able to cast that vision and God gave me the passion for it, I think it attracted people that had greater leadership capacity than I have. Plus, they probably thought, he needs help. And so I need to join his team to help him, because they actually believed in the vision. So here's the problem most organizations have, according to Vern Harnish, that I would echo in his comments. He says, most entrepreneurs and leaders don't enjoy managing other people. This is why organizations do not reach their full potential, and most of them have restricted growth. A lot of entrepreneurs are innovative, they're creative, but sometimes they're not people. They just don't like being around people. It's not that they hate people, it's just that they're not a people person. And a lot of times they do a lot of things on their own. They want to, be alone when they dream and vision, and they're creative. And so because they're not people persons, and because they don't have a lot of experience in managing people, they limit the capacity of their organization. He gives these incredible statistics in his book. He says 32 million firms exist in the United States. 32 million firms exist in the United States. 6% get above 1 million in revenue. Did you hear that? 6% get above 1 million in revenue. Of those, only 1 out of 10, or 0.05%, so half of 1% of all companies ever make it to 10 million in revenue. And only 56,000 companies, now this is out of 32 million, only 56,000 companies surpass 100 million in revenue. Finishing out the list of the top 500 public and private firms, they exceed 6 billion in revenue. So the third principle of Jesus selecting the right people to do the right things is found in Matthew's account, chapter 10. So I think it's important to take, like Luke, what does Luke tell us? Matthew doesn't tell us that Jesus prayed all night. Matthew doesn't say that. Matthew just begins by saying Jesus went out and selected leaders. But Luke gives us the behind-the-scenes story. So what Matthew says here, I think it's important. Jesus called together his 12 disciples. He gave them the power to force out evil spirits and to heal every kind of disease and sickness. So the third principle is this: empowerment of his leaders. Jesus empowered people. He empowered people. He gave them the authority to go and cast out evil spirits and to heal and pray over sickness and disease. Many consultants use the term delegate. However, I believe what is missing is not merely the concept of delegation, but empowerment. If you empower people, they feel empowered. They feel that they have the authority. They can call, they can make the shots. At the Global Leadership Summit, by the way, I invite you to go online and register. The price now is only $179, and it is one of the premier leadership events that you can ever attend. It's 2 days. It's August the 8th and the 9th. We host it here at Christ Church, but you can also view it online. You may be listening to this podcast and you're out of the country. You're not in the United States. You can actually view it online, or you can see if the Global Leadership Summit will come sometime in October or November to your country, because it is literally a global movement. And years ago, one of the leaders there in the global leadership movement talked about this concept of empowering people and giving people authority. And people need to be deputized, if you will. People need to have the authority to do what they need to do. And your organization is limited often by people not feeling empowered, by people not going to the next level. So you have the authority to, in the disciples' case, to cast out demons, heal the sick, etc. You have the authority, in the disciples' case, to cast out demons, heal the sick, etc. And so that authority is very important to pass that on and select people who are capable of it. In the one-year Bible reading, Jesus is teaching in Matthew 24, and Jesus says that when the master goes away, the master selects someone that can run his house. In other words, he trusts him enough to be able to run his house. But what if somebody, when he comes back, is having a party, kind of like a high school or college student, and they're wrecking the place? Well, he's not going to give him any authority next time. So be a good steward of the authority and the empowerment that you have. And then really in God's kingdom principles, he says, if you're faithful over little, I'll make you faithful over what? Over much. And so it's important that we empower people, and then if they handle that authority, if they handle that responsibility well, then obviously then you can trust them with more in the future. And so at Christ Church, we talk about multiple platforms. We may have platform D, which you influence 20 or 50 people. And if they do really well on platform D, then we open it up to platform C, and that may be 50 or 100 people. And if they do really well there, then we open it up to platform B. That may be 200-300 plus people. And if they do really well there, then we may open it up to A, and A may be boundless. We may have 1,000 people viewing online one Sunday. We may have 800, 900, 1,200 in the house at Mountain View. We have hundreds more at other campuses combined. We have another 1,500, 1,600. So you may impact 3,000, 4,000 people in one weekend. I wouldn't give somebody who has a D level platform the A immediately. I would be careful about that. I'm not saying they're not capable of the A, but just give them authority and trust them, encourage them, meet with them, help them to get better, and eventually then they have the larger platform. You have a budget, so utilize it and maximize its potential to invest in people and build healthy systems over time. Lastly, if you have a startup, if you have a small nonprofit or a local church, there'll be pushback here, and someone's likely to say, hey, we don't have your budget. Our budget at Christ Church is a little less than $4 million this year. But I guarantee you 26 years ago, it was right around, well, the income was right around $100,000. The budget was 120, but we didn't have the income. The church couldn't pay my salary when I first came. They just couldn't. 3.5 months later, we had to do a stewardship emphasis, and we had $204,000 committed for the next year. But I had to lovingly challenge people to trust God with their tithes and their offerings. And then from that point forward, we began to hire more staff. We eventually hired a youth pastor. Then we hired a children's pastor. I hired a part-time administrator, so on and so forth. But that brings me to the next part of selecting the right people to do the right thing. Please allow me to give you a golden rule of empowerment. Innovation occurs due to limited resources. Innovation occurs due to limited resources. When you're limited, and we were financially the first several years, very, very, very limited, it also causes you to be more creative and be more innovative. You have to do more with less. And so I think it's important to realize that. We didn't have the media, we didn't have the staff, we didn't have the talent and the resources back then. I would dare say that we were actually better at innovation then than we are now. I mean, I'm just going to say it. We were. I would say that in a way of saying like per capita, depend on what we did back then. We were better at innovation because our resources were more limited. So on our learning curve currently at Christ Church, and my own personal learning curve now is to focus more diligently on innovation and empowering others to lead here at Christ Church, to innovate and to dream more. However, we have to be focused as well on healthy systems, and we'll focus on those at our next podcast next time. I want to give you some homework, though. I want to give you a challenge, if you will. What area of your life do you need to grow in? What area of your personal life do you need to grow in? Could you become more of a people person? What do you need to do to empower people more? What do you personally need to adjust in your life to empower people more? You may not want to empower people because you just don't trust people naturally. You got to get over the trust barrier. You got trust issues. And it may have been people have let you down. People have hurt you. People have squandered your trust. But folks, you can't lead a prevailing organization if you don't trust and entrust people. The only way you can ever empower people is to trust them. And then secondly, how could you be better at empowering those around you? So what's keeping you from going to the next level of growth and empowering? And then secondly, what is it you could do to empower those around you, empower your organization? So thank you for joining us. Look forward to next time.